I was born in 1959, so I was almost 4 years old. So he was assassinated just a few days before my birthday. I was born in November, and I was born on the 27th. So I actually remember, I remember the assassination only like from the child's perspective, because I just have those fleeting memories of my mom being upset and of watching TV coverage, sort of nonstop TV coverage. So, it was definitely a part of my life, but I was very young. We had a book about the Kennedy assassination, and it was produced by Life magazine, and it was just a really heart-wrenching book about the assassination, and it had all of those full color photos of the motorcade and of Jackie Kennedy and her blood-spattered coat, and of the kids, her standing there with her two children, and it was one of the things that struck me when I was younger, and then as I grew older and became a journalist, what struck me is that that was a time when TV was live TV, and TV was young as an industry, and then color photos also, they were young, right? So media was coming of age in many ways at that time. So I think that there's always a time when media plays a role in certain things that happen in our lives. And so big color photos at that time really captured America's attention. And that was one of the ways, was during the Kennedy assassination. I've not really been tuned into those as much, probably because of the journalist in me. So I think I've probably always heard about them. So I can't think of a time when I didn't know that there were conspiracy theories, but especially when I moved to Texas. So I moved to Texas in 1985, and that's probably when I became most aware of them. And in part because I moved to San Antonio and started working at a newspaper in San Antonio. So when I started at the Express News in San Antonio, as you probably know, he was in San Antonio right before he went to Dallas. And so that stop for him in San Antonio right before going to Dallas when he was assassinated, that was a big thing for San Antonio. And so, obviously I wasn't in San Antonio during that time, but in, subsequent years after I got there, the anniversaries and things that would happen, that always came up. And there were plenty of people, even at the newspaper, who were conspiracy theorists. So, it was always a topic. And I worked with journalists over the years who had covered the assassination. So I worked with journalists who talked about, covering, there were some of them who were there when Ruby shot Oswald. So, it was like working with people who had seen history. They had seen history. So, it was always conversation, kind of like, sitting around the bar conversation. But I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, and I think as a journalist, I'm much more inclined to look for evidence. So I haven't really, I haven't honed in on that, but I know that I've certainly worked with people who have had some strong opinions. Whenever you cover a big news event, it's with you. I coordinated the 9/11 coverage for the Express News. So, that will be with me forever. So the people who covered the JFK assassination, that's one of the defining moments in their life. And, reporters that I know who talked about, interviewing people involved with it. It's just the stories they have, you could just sit and listen to them forever. It was a piece of history. So, being a part of that history is, it's inspiring, and it's also, very sad, but they had a job to do that day. And that makes, it makes all the difference when there's something that's so profound, but you have a job to do. So it's a lot easier to handle something like that when you have a job to do. As media evolves, it's incumbent upon journalists to be good at their jobs, first of all, right? And to use our ethics and standards to do our jobs and be responsible. but to also be aware that we aren't operating in a vacuum. So we have to change with technology. So we have to know what's out there, and we have to embrace technology, and we have to change with it. And, you know, can you imagine the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or any of those things happening today, and how we would cover those things today, right? So it was one thing to cover the Kennedy assassination in the era of this new live TV, and how do we do that? But how do you cover it in the age of Twitter, right? How do you cover it in the age of social media? Well, that's where we are today. So those things will happen. I mean, I'm not saying the assassination of a president, but something big like that will happen again. I mean, we saw it with the Boston Marathon, right? We saw it with, you know, the explosion in West. I mean, those things will and do happen. So how do you responsibly cover that? How do you meet the audience, the consumers' need and desire for immediate information, and how do you do it ethically? You know, it's a constant challenge. So that's why we have ethics, right? That's why we have standards, and we'll make some bad calls. We will, and we'll learn from them, and we'll do better the next time. And that's our job, right? I mean, that's why we have professional journalists, and then we have citizen journalists. And citizen journalists are different than professional journalists, and professional journalists should be held to a higher standard. And the public needs professional journalists, because you got to have somebody you can trust. Because if just everything's out there, what can you trust, right? So, I mean, I think to have a healthy democracy, you have to have professional journalists who are making sense of all the craziness in the world. One of the things that the media loves is we love anniversaries, right? I mean, we just love anniversaries. So like the 37th doesn't mean anything, but you know, the 25th, I mean, the 10th, the 20, you know, the 25th, the 50th, those all mean something. You know, the 15th, not so much, but like, you know, the big ones, we love the big ones. So, you know, 10, 25, 50, 100, maybe 75. So yeah, I mean, I'm certain it will, and you know, we're already starting to see some of those things. But so we do commemorate things by anniversary, which, you know, is only right. And you know, I think there's a reason we do that, and part of that is that sometimes you need that time to lapse before we can settle in with information. So, you know, sometimes we need a natural space and time to sort of pass so that we can understand the impact of something. And it takes time before we understand the impact of something. And you know, sometimes there are laws in place that make information not public for a certain amount of time, so that can happen sometimes too. And you know, more information will come out. People feel comfortable talking about things after time has passed. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for taking a look back at something. And so, you know, who knows? I mean, I don't know what's in the National Archive. I don't know what's protected and what's not protected. I don't know what's still held secret and what's not held a secret. But, you know, over time, sometimes new information comes out. So who knows? But, you know, there's a reason, I think, to reflect upon things as time passes. And, you know, it's often a healthy reason to reflect. I mean, you don't need to dwell necessarily, but reflecting can be a healthy thing.